Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to episode 16 of Valleys of Numenor and part 5 of the story of Conan the Barbarian. This time, it's the second part of the Saga of Black and Red, Conan the Warrior. The Cimmerian leaves the sea to become a scout for Aquilonia, the mightiest kingdom of the Hyborian Age. This brings him into conflict with the wild tribe of the forests, the Picts. His battles with them end up leading him back to the sea, and eventually into partnership with a female adventurer who is his equal in many ways, but not all. Conan was captain of the Wastrel for some time. His reputation for wreaking havoc along the shipping lanes of Argos and Zingara grew even more fearsome. With his knowledge of the Black Coast, he led the ship down the rivers into Kush and Stygia, continuing to earn the enmity of its leader Thoth-Amon. There are tales the Cimmerian grew engulfed in the political turmoil of Zingara. Those are not in the chronicles but detailed elsewhere. Also from other sources are stories of Conan's partnership with unlikely ally, the Vanir pirate Sigurd. What the chronicles do say is that the Wastrel ended up wrecked along the shores of Shem after a terrible storm. Whether that storm was a creation of Thoth-Amon is left up for debate. The ship was shattered against the rocky shore, killing almost every man aboard. Once again, Conan managed to survive, and even in his injured state, was able to scale the cliffs of the shore to safety. He caught on with a caravan heading north to Aquilonia for the funeral of King Valeris. His son Numenor was now on the throne and announced his intention to expand the country's borders to the western sea through the Pictish wilderness. As a youth, Conan had traveled along both the Black and Thunder rivers, so it was familiar ground to him. Once in Aquilonia, the Cimmerians sought out the leaders of the army and signed on as a scout. They wisely attached him to an outfit assigned to the area where Aquilonia and Cimmeria met the Pictish lands. He soon was able to lead the troops to numerous successes, and the Picts fled to the western side of the Black River. He also killed one of their leaders in single combat and took a prize for himself. The Picts had led a raid into Cimmeria and captured a helmet with bull horns on it that belonged to Conan's tribal leader. Now it returned to the head of a Cimmerian. Excited by their early successes, Numenor commanded that the area between the Thunder and Black Rivers be colonized and the territory of Kanajahara be established. Fort Velitrium on the Thunder River was a hastily built outpost, and settlers began to populate the area. Fort Tusculum on the Black River was even worse, with barely enough of a supply route to keep it stocked. The Picts attacked constantly, but were able to be repelled thanks to the Aquilonian army garrison kept at the fort. Then Numenor recalled the garrison, sending it off on another one of his expansionist efforts elsewhere. The fort commander Valanis begged him to leave at least a smaller group there, but he was ignored. So the Picts began to attack once more, increasing in their ferocity. Conan's stature grew as he slew a large number of them to protect the outpost. During a fight one day, after killing one, he came upon a young man traveling from Velitrium to Tusculum named Balthus, and went with him to make sure he made it to his destination. Along the way, they discovered a dead merchant, Tiberius. Balthus thought a Pict had killed him, but Conan realized he was killed by a swamp demon. A group of soldiers meant to protect the merchant's caravan were killed by a wizard named Zogar Sag. He was out in the wilderness raising the Picts to attack the settlers. The two raced into the woods where they heard screaming. They found a settler's wife dead and realized they were tricked. When they returned to Tiberius's body, it was missing its head. Once they reached the fort and Conan told Valanis about what they had found, he had the Cimmerian take a group of men of his choice out to find the wizard. Balthus volunteered to go since he was an experienced hunter since he came from the woods of Turan and Gunderland. The group headed up the river in canoes but were soon overtaken by Picts. Most of the men were killed while Balthus and another scout were captured. Conan was able to get away in the underbrush. When he found the Pictish camp, the scout was being sacrificed to a saber-toothed tiger under the direction of Zogar Sag. Balthus was tied to a stake and threatened by a giant snake. Conan hurled his spear at the creature and drove it away. He cut the boy loose and the two escaped in the commotion. The wizard was able to use the sign of an ancient god, Jebel Sag, to control both men and beasts alike. There was no question the fort and settlers were under immediate danger. At the very least, they needed to get back across the Thunder River to Velitrium. The two headed into the woods to the west as to avoid the Pictish horde. As they did, Balthus amazed as the Cimmerian talked of his many travels and trades. He'd been everything except a Hyborian king and didn't rule that out someday. But then the two were attacked again and headed back towards the river. Further down, they discovered a dog who used to belong to a settler the Picts killed. Conan had found him earlier and nursed him back to health, calling him Slasher. But the canine took to the woods and sought out Picts to attack on his own. The trio reached Fort Tusculum but found it besieged by Picts. All inside were lost, so the only thing to do was save whoever else they could and send them towards Velitrium. They came upon one settlement, but the men had left to find salt in the river. Conan would go catch them, while Balthus and Slasher would stay at the settlement to hold off the Picts while the women and children got away. Conan caught the men and told them to head to Velitrium to be with their families. As they left, the Cimmerian thought he heard Balthus's voice, but when it emerged from the forest, it turned out to be a swamp demon. It claimed to be the brother of Zogarsag, born of Jebelsag himself. It attacked the barbarian as a dozen animals would, but Conan was able to survive and beheaded the demon. Later, he managed to make his way to Velitrium. There, he found out Valanis had indeed died at the fort, but not before taking several Picts with him. To his surprise, Zogarsag was also dead, dropping dead suddenly right around the same time as Conan killed the demon. Finally, he heard Balthus and Slasher were also dead, having killed at least 7 Picts between them. As he sat down at the tavern swearing tenfold revenge on the Picts for the boy and his dog, the realization came that the frontier, for now, has been lost. Kanajahara was no more. The woodsman who told Conan about the loss of the fort left him with one more thought. Barbarism is the natural state of mankind. Civilization is an unnatural whim of circumstance, and barbarism must always ultimately triumph. All the civilized people who tried to survive in the wilderness, Tiberius, Valanis, the settlers, and even Balthus, had been lost. Conan, the barbarian, had survived beyond the Black River. Over the next year, Conan kept his word and turned the area that was Kanajahara between the Thunder and Black Rivers into a killing field. He did it both as the leader of armed troops and on solo missions. During one night protecting a settlement on the Thunder River, Conan found himself surrounded by the wolf tribe and was overwhelmed. He was tied up and brought back to their camp. Then when the Eagle tribe came to discuss the return of some wolf tribesmen, they demanded Conan be turned over to them. He destroyed their main village some months before, so they were out for revenge. There had been talk that Numenides had grown concerned about the Cimmerian, so he arranged for him to be captured, but those were only whispers. Conan was brought to the Eagle village and was being prepared for sacrifice. But as the ceremony was ready, the barbarian was able to snap his bonds and kill the chief. He ran out of the camp and headed west. The Eagle Picts came after him, and Conan was able to take down one after the other. After some days, he reached a ledge near the sea. But as he ready to make his final stand, the Picts stopped and ran off in horror. The Cimmerian wondered where he was to cause them to react in such a way. Surprisingly, he found a door in the rocks. He opened it and found several dead bodies sitting at a table. These were of the famed pirate Tranikos and his men. Suddenly, Conan was attacked by an unseen force, but managed to free himself and make it out of the cave. The next day was stormy, but Conan was able to spot smoke and fire coming from up the coast near a newly constructed fort. It had been built by a Zingaran noble, Count Valenso, who'd gone into exile, bringing with him his niece Belesa and her ward Tina. The reason for his exile was not known by anyone save the Count. 2 ships were offshore, one anchored, the other wrecked against the rocks. The wreck was a ship of Black Zorano. Some writings call it the Petrel. The other was the Red Hand, vessel of Strombani, who is known among the pirates as just Strom. Conan approached the fort and found Glaucus, Strom's mate, and an old enemy of his. When the two saw each other, blades were quickly drawn. But before they fought, Glaucus took paper out of his pocket and went to eat it. Conan then split his skull and took the paper for himself. The barbarian then snuck into the fort and stealthily entered a room where Strom, Zorano, and Valenso were meeting to discuss retrieving the treasure of Tranikos for themselves. Conan emerged from the shadows and told them not to bother, since he knew where it was. Everyone in the room was stunned to see him because they all believed he had gone down with the Wastrel now some 3 years earlier. They decided on a plan to get the treasure, split it 4 ways, then each goes their own way. There were 2 obstacles, however. One was the Picts, who all knew were constant danger. The other was a strange figure in black, seen by the girl Tina, and the very mention of whom frightened Valenzo to the core. These 2 forces seemingly came together when the head of a Pict was found with a necklace from Valenzo's province wrapped around it. As they prepared to make the trip to where Conan said the treasure was, Valenzo told Balesa the story behind his exile. He used the ancient arts of an old Stygian wizard to defeat a personal enemy. The wizard called upon a black demon to do the deed, but the price would be the Count would now be the demon's servant. The two then conspired to trap the monster in a hell of its own. But it soon freed itself and killed the wizard. Now it was after Valenzo and killed anything in its path. When the 3 pirates reached the cave, they entered, except Conan. Zorano and Strom could not believe the riches that existed right before them, surrounded by a blue haze. But then they looked down and saw Valenzo's servant Galbril dead on the ground. He'd run off the night before, apparently having learned the location of the treasure. Suddenly the 2 men couldn't breathe and barely made it out alive. The blue haze was poison, and Conan admitted he was going to use it to take the red hand for himself. There was an old story about a Pictish wizard who trapped 12 men with a mass of riches in a cave with a poison mist. This was the source of that story. Suddenly they heard the sound of Picts preparing to mount an attack. A torrent of arrows rained down on them. Conan used an old trick to distract them, giving them all time to head back to the fort. They returned, locked the gate, then looked to the sea and saw the red hand heading away. The savages soon overwhelmed the fort and killed both Strom and Zorano. Conan took Balesa and Tina further inside, where he found Valenzo hanging from the ceiling, in much the same manner Belit was. He knew this was the work of the supernatural. Soon the demon came out of the darkness to attack the Cimmerian. Conan remembered an old legend about fire and silver being combined can be used to kill a demon, so he took an old silver bench, lit the fabric on fire, and threw it at the horror. It did as the old legend said, and the demon disappeared. On the shore, Conan signaled for the red hand to return, which it did. Conan took command of the Red Hand and took on a new crew to plunder the coast once more. There were tales that he became embroiled in Zingaran politics again, and the effort ended with the crown being offered to him, but he refused. It is hard to imagine Conan would have turned down a kingdom, but maybe he had his reasons, or the tale is simply not true. What Conan did do in Zingara is documented elsewhere. The kingdom ordered one of its greatest sailors, Irolando, to hunt the ship down. He followed the Red Hand for several days at a distance, then saw some men went ashore in the barracas to resupplies. They were captured and sentenced to death unless they helped capture their captain. All refused, so they were hung, including a young man of 15 who convinced the Cimmerian to take him aboard. When word reached Conan of the executions, he swore revenge and had the ship sail to the Zingaran port city of Valaladad. Irolando's ships were harbored there, plus a caravan from Ophir was arriving, so that gave them additional reasons for an attack. In the dead of night, the crew of the Red Hand sacked the city, practically burning it to the ground, wrecking the ships and stealing the jewels. They sailed away and spent the next day drinking heavily to celebrate their victory. But fate dealt them a harsh blow, since Irolando had ordered the rest of the Zingaran navy to chase the ship. He also made a deal with Argos for them to send some ships to end the menace themselves. They arrived at dawn, and the captain almost immediately set sail after the pirate vessel. A day later, Conan awoke first to find all his men passed out. Through hazy eyes, he spotted a number of ships nearby, then suddenly flaming arrows began striking the ship. He tried to rouse the men, but none moved. A large Argosian vessel was equipped with a catapult that launched rocks into the pirate vessel. Conan found his sword and prepared to meet the boarders, but a burning piece of the mast fell off and struck him, knocking him unconscious. When he regained his senses, he was on Irolando's ship. The Zingaran sought to hang him in Cordava, but the Cimmerian told him about his discovery of the treasure of Tranikos and convinced him to sail to get it. The ship headed north back to the Pictish wilderness, where they landed on a wooded shore. Conan led Irolando and his men into the forest, then disappeared. Before they could locate him, they were attacked by Picts and wiped out except for the captain. The Zingaran ran deep into the woods, where he found Conan hiding in a grove. The Cimmerian then told him his actual plan. This was revenge for what he did to his men, but now he decided he couldn't leave them to the Picts just yet. They began to make their way towards where Conan had found the treasure, knowing about the poisonous trap. But a group of Zorano's men were searching for it as well. The two ended up in a battle between the two forces of the pirates and the Picts. They ended up on a small hill near the Black River, which Conan knew, but Irolando did not. The barbarian threw him a sword and told him the treasure could wait for another day. He was on his own. He then took off into the woods, leaving the captain yelling his name that echoed through the woods. There was no record of what happened to him after that, but he was heard of no more. The Red Hand's revenge was complete. Conan followed the Black River northward to possibly return to his old deployment as a scout, but then decided to head southward instead. What made him change his mind is unknown. But he decided to search out the outlaw Zarallo and his band of the Free Companions. Finding him would be difficult, so Conan shook the underworld to see who knew where they could be found. During his stay in Aquilonia, he sparred with the merchant Zargiba and his band of dancing girls. The burly merchant let slip the outlaws were looking to raid Sukhmet in the southern part of Stygia. Conan soon found the band and joined up, but discovered the life was not as interesting as had been promised. The pickings were poor and the riches were not plentiful. But things changed with the arrival of the pirate Valeria. She had come from a wealthy Aquilonian family, but left to find adventure for herself. She became a member of the Red Brotherhood of Buccaneers, and soon had a reputation almost as fearsome as Belit herself. Red Ortho captured the ship she was sailing on and wanted her as his woman, but she leapt overboard and came ashore near where the Free Companions were raiding. She rode with them to Sukhmet. Zarallo had bribed the city officials to leave his band alone, but a Stygian officer became enthralled with Valeria and made aggressive advances on her. She pulled out her knife and killed him, then leapt on a horse and rode south. The officer's brother rode after her, followed by Conan. The barbarian caught up and killed him, tossing him into the jungle. He then set after Valeria, which took several days. Once he caught up to her deep in the jungle, the two left their horses drinking at a stream while they investigated where they were. They heard the sound of their horses making noises as if they were being eaten. The two returned to find a giant wingless dragon killing the animals for food. They raced to the top of a rocky crag to safety. While there, they found a potent fruit plant that contained a poison. They also spotted a domed city in the distance. They came up with a plan to send the poisonous plant into the creature's mouth, then head for the city. The plan worked, causing the dragon to race off to the water, while the two outlaws ran down and made their way to the city. Out in the desert, they found a small patch of cactus to protect them and rested for the night. In the morning, they continued for the city. Valeria mentioned Conan had been many things in his life. Offhandedly, he mentioned he hadn't been the king of a Hyborian land. They reached the city and noticed there was no sign of life. Conan opened the gate, which opened into a great hall. The two noticed how the style of the palace did not resemble that of the south or Stygia, but more like Vendya in the east. It was laden with jade, which is native to the eastern lands. Conan decided to investigate the palace further, while Valeria rested in the chamber. But soon after he left, she saw a man walking in a distant part of the hall. She followed him to a chamber where he lay dead on the floor. Suddenly another man came out of the darkness and went to his side. On a dais stood a figure with a flaming skull. Without waiting, she jumped up and took off the creature's head. It was a man in a mask, but she could not explain how he glowed. The man from the darkness was Tekodal, and he was from Tekulti. He begged her to follow him before the men of Xoltalanc attacked them, but she was drawn towards the skull that still glowed. Tekodal says it was from an ancient magic and could cause death, so Valeria ended the curse by smashing it with her sword. At that point, warriors emerged from the darkness and attacked them. Conan returned in time to help slay them all. They were the Xoltalancos Tekuli had warned about. He began to tell them about the city they were in when a crawling creature attacked them from the darkness. Conan fought it and it slithered away. The three of them then entered the hall of Tukulti. In the main palace area, the leaders of the Tukulti tribe sat at the head of a room. Prince Olmec and his consort Tiskela offered them welcome of a sort. Olmec told the visitors about the history of the city known as Zakotl. A tribe came out of the east, settled in the area, and raided the city, wiping out the previous inhabitants. Two brothers, Tukulti and Xoltalanc, as well as Tolkemec, who had been a slave under the previous regime, ruled the area in peace. Then Xoltalanc took a wife. His brother grew jealous and stole her. Soon the three forces took separate parts of the city and fortified themselves. Tukulti's tribe attacked Tolkemec, tortured him, and threw him in the dungeon where he was heard of no more. The two remaining tribes went to war again, but never left the city, and neither side had any children, so consumed they were with the battle. Olmec noted they kept track of the dead on the other side by hammering red nails into a black column. As Olmec told the story, Tisela paid attention only to Valeria. The pirate felt fear in the woman's burning eyes. When Conan stated they would leave the city in the morning, the woman told them that they could never leave. So the Cimmerian said they would help wipe out the Xoltalankas and take treasure with them. When they left to retire for the night, Conan asked Zakotl if Tisela was Olmec's wife. He said she was the woman the three leaders fought about over 50 years ago. Yet the woman looked young and beautiful. It turned out she was from Stygia and had learned the secret of perpetual youth. As Valeria rested in her room, she noticed someone trying to push a flower in her face. It was a black lotus, which caused sleep that resembled death. Tisela's servant girl, Yasala, was the assailant. Valeria grabbed her and beat her to get her to reveal what she was doing. But when Valeria let her go, the girl escaped. She tried to chase her, but the servant girl had disappeared. Just then, the Xoltalankas attacked, forcing Olmec, Zakotl, and Conan to battle the invaders. Valeria soon joined them, and the enemy force was wiped out, seemingly ending the feud. The Cimmerian offered to go to the other side of the city to make sure. Taking two Tukulti warriors with him, Conan entered the hall on the far side of the city to find the crawler he battled earlier, but it was dead. As he looked to see what caused its death, the two warriors then attacked him. Conan defended himself, and before the men died, they told him Olmec wanted Valeria for himself and sent them with the barbarian to kill him. Conan raced back to the other side of the city, where a wounded Zakotl was coming towards him. He told him Valeria indeed had been captured, and then he fell dead. Valeria had been taken to a side room to treat her wounds, but Olmec took her by force to his chambers. As he tried to force the woman into submission, Tisela entered and castigated the prince for stealing the visitor. She entranced him and made him drink some wine, which paralyzed him. She had him tied to a table while she took Valeria to the temple. She would be sacrificed so Tisela could take her blood for herself and continue her ongoing youth. Once Conan arrived, he untied Olmec on the promise he would take him to Valeria. The two raced for the temple, but Olmec got behind the Cimmerian and tried to knock him out. Conan turned and caught a glancing blow. He then grabbed the prince, and the two fell down a flight of stairs. When they'd reached the bottom, Olmec was dead. Conan arrived at the temple to find Valeria on the altar and Tisela preparing for the sacrifice. Suddenly, on the other side from the dungeons came a ghostly figure. There had been whispers of Tolkemec's ghosts haunting the dungeons, but now all could see the former slave and ruler was not dead. He was not only a former slave, but a wizard himself, with a wand in his hand that dealt out death to all the remaining Tukulis. Conan came up behind the old man and stabbed him in the heart. Tisela went to grab a knife herself to kill the Cimmerian, but Valeria got it first and drove it into the evil woman's heart. The two had entered into a feud between two factions that ended in a red harvest of death. The city of Zakotl was truly a dead one. Conan and Valeria left, pledging themselves to each other and promising the world would not be ready for their plunder. Here ends the saga of Black and Red. The tales in this section of the Chronicles are told in the stories Beyond the Black River, The Black Stranger, and Red Nails. The tale of Conan and his battle with Irolanda was lost, but a modern version of it has been told by the chronicler. Another well-known chronicler has told the tale himself, but had it set during another part of Conan's life. Next time it will be Conan the King. After losing out on a fortune in a lost city, Conan is recruited to lead the Aquilonian army. But soon the king grew jealous of him and tried to have him killed. Conan escaped to raise an army of his own to take on the tyrant. But once he'd taken the throne, forces, both mortal and supernatural, conspired to destroy him. That's next time on Valleys of Numenor. Thank you for listening.